let's talk about a story that's, well, it's a powerful and pretty chilling cautionary tale. It all starts back in the winter of 2001 in a remote forest in Georgia. What seemed like just a lucky, harmless find was about to turn into an absolute radiological nightmare.
Okay, so picture this. You're out in a freezing forest, maybe looking for firewood, and you find something warm. That's exactly what happened to three guys. They stumbled on two metal cylinders that were just radiating this gentle, comforting heat. I mean, what would you do? They did what most of us probably would have. They took them back to their camp to stay warm for the night. And here's where the real tragedy of this whole thing kicks in. It all starts with a simple mistake. See, these guys had absolutely no clue what they were messing with. To them, it just looked like old military scrap, or maybe some kind of heating element. And that one critical misunderstanding, that's what set this whole horrible disaster in motion.
But as you can probably guess, that comforting warmth came at a terrible, terrible price. It wasn't long at all after their discovery that the men were just overcome by this really strange and aggressive illness.
And I mean, it was alarmingly fast. We're talking within hours, they started feeling nausea, fatigue. Then, just days later, their skin started developing these awful, severe lesions, almost like burns. And in the weeks that followed, their hair started falling out. It's just horrifying. Their bodies were literally being attacked from the inside by an enemy they couldn't even see.
So when they finally got to doctors, the diagnosis was grim. It was acute radiation syndrome. This is a really severe illness you get from exposure to a huge dose of radiation in a very short amount of time. And all their symptoms, the nausea, the skin lesions, the hair loss, they were classic textbook signs of intense radiation poisoning. That warmth they thought was so comforting, yeah, that was actually the radioactive decay of incredibly powerful isotopes.
And this diagnosis, this textbook case, well, it had devastating real-world human costs. We're not just talking about symptoms on a chart anymore. We're talking about real and tragically fatal consequences.
Tragically, one of the men didn't make it. In the medical reports, he's just identified as patient 1DN. The dose of radiation he received was so severe that it was ultimately fatal.
So, why did one die and the others survive? It all came down to the severity of their exposure. See, patient 1DN, he had carried the larger of the two sources right on his back. He absorbed a completely lethal dose. The other two men, they were critically ill for sure, but they did eventually recover. The difference in what happened to them was as simple and as tragic as how close they were and for how long.
This all begs the question, right? What in the world were these mysterious heat-emitting cylinders? To really get that, we've got to dive into the science behind this invisible danger.
Okay, so what they found were the core components of something called a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, or RTG for short. The easiest way to think of them is like nuclear batteries. Seriously. They take the intense heat from decaying radioactive material, in this case strontium-90, and use it to generate a steady supply of electricity. These things were built to power remote facilities in really harsh environments, and they could run for years without anyone ever needing to touch them.
And this brings us to a really crucial term you need to know to understand this whole thing, an orphan source. What is that? Well, an orphan source is basically any radioactive material that's been lost or stolen or just plain abandoned. It's no longer under any kind of regulatory control, and that's exactly what these RTGs were. Just left behind in a forest, turning into these silent, invisible, and deadly traps.
Now, it would be really comforting to think this was just a one-off, a total freak accident. But the terrifying truth, the Lia accident is just one single example of a much, much larger global problem.
I mean, all over the world, there are stories just like this one. People who had no idea what they were doing, stumbling across these lost sources, and it leads to terrible injuries and even death. A big part of the problem, for sure, came from the collapse of the Soviet Union. Thousands of these devices were just left unaccounted for, scattered all over with basically no security. But let's be clear, this isn't just a post-Soviet problem. This is a worldwide issue.
So, the bottom line is pretty simple and pretty scary. Every single one of these lost or abandoned radioactive sources is a major public health hazard. They're literally ticking time bombs, just sitting out there waiting for the wrong person to come along, someone who has no idea of the danger they're about to pick up.
Okay, so that's the problem. The crucial question then is, what do we do about it? right? How do we actually learn from a tragedy like the one in Lia and make sure something like this never, ever happens again?
Well, the path forward is definitely challenging, but it's also pretty clear. First, you need strict, what they call cradle-to-grave control over all radioactive materials. Second, when these sources are done being used, there have to be proper secured disposal procedures. You can't just leave them lying around. And finally, and this is a big one, it's going to take international cooperation to actually track down and secure all the orphan sources that are still out there. Every single one of these steps is absolutely critical if we want to prevent another tragedy.
And that really leaves us with one last and pretty chilling question to think about. The Lia accident, that whole nightmare, was caused by just 2 forgotten objects. So you have to wonder, how many more are still out there, lost in some forest, buried in a scrapyard, maybe even sitting at the bottom of the sea, just waiting?